The following is the tale of the Reichadler's nest, a retelling of how the German century came to be in the fires of der endgültige Krieg, the final war. We start our tale in the year of 1914, when one fatal shot, heard around the world, would mark the start of the Weltkrieg. The Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was shot on a state visit to Sarajevo by, according to later independent investigation by the Kaiserliche Geheimpolizei, paid actors sent by the cowardly Serbians, directed by the Russians, and paid for by the British to destabilize the Austrian Empire. But the brave Kaiser of Germany, despite the clear dangers it posed of escalating into a conflict with the warmongering Entente, gave full support to the Austrians to punish Serbia as they saw fit for this cowardly act. As could be expected, the barbarians of Russia jumped on this opportunity to destroy the Austrians, so Germany simply had to mobilize as well and preemptively declare war on the French. The Germans fully realized that Russia and France had been coordinating for this war for decades, and as such, they had to knock out France as soon as possible. But France's army was mobilized along the border, and simply piercing through wasn't feasible. Germany needed to pass through Belgium to invade northern France. The Belgians were, obviously, more than willing to allow the Germans to pass, but the British pressured them to resist in order to fabricate an excuse to dogpile on the Germans as well, hoping to destroy the German colonial empire and use the war to completely devastate German industry, wrecking the German economy and destroying the German nation. With this British declaration of war, the main pieces were now all in play, as Germany and Austria were fighting for their very survival against the bloodthirsty Entente, rooting for their destruction. The German war plan was sound. Rush through Belgium and northern France, seize Paris, then surround the bulk of French forces along the border, and force a mild peace deal, ending the entire affair by Christmas. But it soon became clear that the British too had long prepared for this war, as when German forces entered Belgium, it was millions of British forces that they found facing them. In most battles, the Germans were outnumbered 2-1 against the French and the British, but thanks to the superior German fighting spirit, they still managed to push and push, coming within inches of Paris. The only reason that the Germans failed to end the war in this most crucial moment is because communist elements within the nation forced the unnecessary redirection of troops to the Eastern Front, in hopes of extending the war and inciting revolutions across Europe. Thanks to this cowardly stab in the back, the Western Front would lock itself down into trench warfare for the following years. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Russians had clearly started mobilizing in secret way before announcing it, as they began pushing significantly earlier than anticipated. Luckily though, the Russians had a frankly embarrassing army, and were stopped by the small Eastern German Defense Force, and towards the end of 1915, Russia had already been pushed back hard. Meanwhile, Germany and Britain were waging a diplomatic war around the Mediterranean, as the Entente were making lavish promises to anyone who'd listen. Like promising Italy everywhere up to Bavaria were they to join the war, showing just how set the Entente was on the destruction of Germany. Italy would be tempted by the promises of the Entente, while Germany was taking the more noble route. The Bulgarians had been trampled on by their neighbors plenty of times, so Germany offered to restore Bulgaria's righteous position in the Balkans. Likewise, the Entente were planning to carve up and colonize the Ottoman Empire, so Germany offered them a place amongst the Central Powers. Up to this point, the Austrians had failed to take care of the Serbians, but with elite German forces bolstering their numbers and a Bulgarian attack from the south, they would soon collapse. The cowardly Entente would force the Albanians and Greeks to give passage to fleeing Serbian forces, forcing an invasion of these states as well, allowing most of the Balkans to be pacified by the end of 1915. 1916 would see a major Russian offensive into Austria-Hungary, after which the Entente forced the Romanians to join the conflict as well. But, thanks to German and Bulgarian reinforcements, the Romanians would soon collapse and be allowed to switch sides to the Central Powers. A lot of pressure was being put on the Ottoman Empire by the Entente, who were trying to tear the empire apart by inciting rebellions, but, knowing that they were fighting for their very survival, the Ottomans bravely resisted any Entente advances into their lands, like when the British attempted a frankly embarrassing invasion of Gallipoli, leading to the capture of over 1 million Entente soldiers. Up to this point, the war had mostly been a stalemate, but in 1917, Germany would truly manage to change the tides of the war. In Russia, the sheer incompetence of the new regime would lead to the fall of the Tsarist government. The new Republicans would attempt a new offensive, only to be humiliated by the Germans and overthrown by the Bolsheviks. The Germans would offer these Reds a fair peace deal, but they would refuse, forcing Germany to push deep into Russia until the Bolsheviks accepted a much harsher peace deal this time. This Treaty of Brest-Litovsk would massively bolster German food security thanks to imports from Ukraine, ensuring that despite the illegal blockade from the Entente, the Central Powers still had years of war in them. At this most crucial moment, only one thing could have possibly changed the tide for the Entente: the United States. But they were across an ocean, locked in isolation. The Entente had done everything to convince the US to join their side, but the US population, especially the very significant number of German Americans, were unwilling to listen. The treacherous American political leadership attempted to steer the population towards war, but with Britain intentionally starving the Central Powers population through an illegal blockade, while the Central Powers were committed to safe and free waters, ensured that the Germans were, understandably, seen as the reasonable party in this war. 1918 would see two major offensives by the Central Powers, one in Italy and one in France. Across the entire war, the Central Powers had intentionally taken up a defensive posture on both front lines, as the kind-spirited Kaiser Wilhelm realized that mindless offensives costing thousands of German lives were not going to change the course of the war. But now, with the Eastern Front over, it was time to surprise the Entente. The first push did major damage to the French lines, and the Entente scrambled to stabilize the front. But this push was merely the distraction. With the Entente focused on France, the Austrians, under German guidance, pushed straight through the Italian lines, soon capturing Venice and rushing down the peninsula. The Italians demanded Entente reinforcements, but the constant German pressure on France prevented this from happening. The Italians, now under major military threat and feeling betrayed by the Entente, sued for peace with the Central Powers. Venetia Lombardia would be ceded to Austria, and Italy would switch sides to the Central Powers. This new Italian front alone would already be majorly destabilizing to the Entente war effort, but it would soon get significantly worse. Despite American neutrality, American banks, private investors, and even their treacherous government were loaning money to the Entente. But, with victory now seemingly impossible for the Entente, no new money was being lent to them, and the Entente swiftly found themselves increasingly bankrupt. Entente weapons and resource imports were decreasing, industries were collapsing, and their army effectiveness went into the gutter. Soon, a mutiny would become a French communist revolution, and peace was ensured on the Western Front, as by the end of 1918, the continent was solidly under German control. This would lead to Germany completely reshaping the European mainland. France would need to cede important industrial regions in the east to Germany, their Alpine region and Tunisia to Italy, and even Morocco to the neutral Spanish, in exchange for German passage through Spain into Portugal. On the world stage, France would need to cede African colonies to both Italy and Germany, as well as their American and Asian colonies to Germany. Portugal and Belgium would both also have to give away their colonies to the Germans, founding Mittelafrica, as Britain and Germany now compete for who has the largest colonial empire. Back in Europe, Belgium would be turned into a German puppet, with the German border pushed to the Meuse. The Balkan would also be reorganized, with Bulgaria being expanded to include their rightful territories, with the rest of the Balkans being turned into a series of Austrian puppets. Finally, Eastern Europe was rearranged one more time. Germany seized the Polish Strip, while the rest of Poland was turned into an Austrian puppet. The temporary Baltic puppet regime was abolished, with the territory being directly incorporated into Germany. Crimea too would be directly annexed into Germany to serve as a Kriegsmarine base in the Black Sea, while Ukraine, Belarus, and the Caucasus states would be turned into German puppets. But even after this massive reorganization, rightful German hegemony was not yet guaranteed. The British, despite being alone and broke, kept up their war efforts, while the threat of the communists in France and Russia were impossible to ignore. 1919 would be spent on restoring order across the anarchic regions of Europe, as Germany once again invaded France, this time to end communism. Eitel Friedrich, Wilhelm II's son, would be installed on the throne of France, decisively securing Western Europe for Germany. In Russia, a similar story ensued. During the civil war between the Red and White armies, the Germans invaded to back a third party, Prince Adalbert, another son of Wilhelm, as the next Russian Tsar. The war in Russia would be long and messy, and rebellions would continue for decades, but the throne of the Russian behemoth was eventually secured for Germany. From this point, all German efforts could finally be directed towards the British, the mastermind behind all of the Entente efforts. All of Europe began to gear towards the production of dreadnought after dreadnought, as the Entente simply couldn't keep up. A joint Italian-Ottoman offensive would capture the Suez, further devastating British logistics. This would lead to Japan deciding to switch sides from the Entente to the Central Power, threatening British Asian holdings. Wilhelm II, reportedly, was so impressed by this move, he'd refer to Japan as the Prussia of Asia from that moment on. Britain simply couldn't withstand the pressure anymore, as slowly but steadily they lost more and more ground across the world. The death knell would come after a German invasion of Scotland and southern England, while the Irish launched a mass rebellion. With the British mainland now occupied, Victoria Louise, Wilhelm's only daughter, was installed as the new Queen of the British Empire. A major territorial restructuring of the empire would ensue, as the dominions of Australia, New Zealand and Canada would break their ties with the mainland, while Britain's African and American empire would be divided between the Central Powers, as the only colonial possession that they were allowed to keep was India. There were now only two significant nations who didn't accept German hegemony, the USA and China. China became the first target as they were already at war with the Central Powers. A task force, including most every Central Power state, a true global coalition of the willing, forced the Chinese to the negotiating table. Wilhelm, intelligently, anticipated the power that a united China would have, considering 30% of the world's population lived there. So, Russia got to set up a puppet regime in Mongolia and Xinjiang, Japan in Manchuria, and Britain in Tibet. Germany would then take direct control over Shandong and give every willing Central Power member treaty ports across China, with even Romania and Bulgaria getting some. The rest of China would be restored under the Qing, but under strict oversight from the Germans, Japanese, British, Russians and Italians to ensure their future modernization. The final opponent would now need to be addressed, the United States. The campaign against the Americans would take on a radically different form than all the others. Planning had begun in 1922, with Germany and allies taking up locations across the Pacific and Caribbean, as multiple massive naval invasions were being planned. But, more importantly, was the morale warfare. The German Americans were being constantly informed about how great it was to be in the home country, while they were being told of the many betrayals of their government. Thanks to American loans to Britain and France now never being repaid, as well as the downfall of America's position in the global trading order, America had entered a severe economic depression, as America's capitalist class would approach the Kaiser with a plot. Should the Kaiser manage to put enough pressure on the American government, they could lead a coup against the government and ensure a quick peace. All they demanded was to continue the United States as an independent nation after the war. Wilhelm II, not the power-hungry type, realized that this was the best way to prevent a long and drawn-out conflict between the two brother states of the US and Germany. So then, in 1927, the Japanese landed in the Philippines, Alaska and California, while the Mexicans invaded from the south, as the Germans made headway in Florida and New England. Within weeks, the feeble American democracy began crashing down. The businessmen orchestrated a march on the White House and forced a rewrite of the US Constitution. A newly established Chamber of Commerce, made up of the US's best, would get most of the political power in the new American system, and several German aristocrats were made observers to this new body. Even though Wilhelm had hoped to respect American territorial integrity, his allies demanded compensation for their involvement, and so the new US government had to cede their western coast, the Philippines, their Caribbean territories, and southern lands to various Central Power members. And now, with the dust settled, we have the world as we mostly know it today. The coming decades would still see some changes, most notably the joint Japanese-American invasion of Canada, but this is the world we all know and love. But as Wilhelm II, the father of Europe, grows increasingly old and feeble, doubts are beginning to be cast on the future stability of the world. Without the great patriarch, will this new system that he built up last? Will his children remain united in kinhood, or will geopolitical tension win over familial love? Will the United States, now more powerful than ever before under Pax Germanica, remain a valued friend and ally of the Germans, or will their manifest destiny play up again? We shall have to wait and see, but for now, a grateful Kaiser sits upon his throne like the Reichadler sits upon his nest. But that's it for this video. Thank you all for watching, consider leaving a like and a comment to support the content, subscribe for 2 more videos every single week, and to continue watching, click on one of the 2 videos on screen now. Again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.